coming up on this episode of Harmless.
Our job is to protect the people that we serve, and we serve the community. We're here to try to make the world a safer place. I've never lost sight of that in 39 and a half years. I can remember the first video I saw, which was a guy that we'd arrested, and I'm like, oh my God, how many times has this happened to this child? I can still play that video in my head. You'll never, ever remove that. That image, that video is a crime scene. It is a moment in time when a horrendous crime is occurring. The only problem we have is we don't know where the crime scene is. You've got to pull it all apart digitally and try to find the child. And if you manage to do that, that's one of the coping strategies for dealing with the work. We're never going to arrest our way out of this problem, but we can try to make sure that we are keeping a victim-centric approach to the work that we're doing. And that's what it's about, just really amazing, selfless people who are just trying to make the difference in a child's life.
Welcome to Harmless, the podcast. I'm your host, Eric Oldenburg. And today, I have a conversation for you to listen to with an absolutely incredible man. This man is Jon Rouse. Jon worked with the Queensland Police Department for just shy of 40 years and has been an integral part in so many investigations with international reach involving the protection of children. Jon Rouse is known globally and very well respected for the work that he has done and continues to do in retirement. If you go to Jon's LinkedIn page, you can see all the incredible work that he has done and continues to do, the way he still supports foundations, still teaches, passes information on to the next generation. Jon has been in this fight for over 40 years and has just an incredible story. I am fortunate enough to not only have won over Jon's respect, but also his friendship. And for that, I am eternally grateful. I think you will find that this is one of the most interesting conversations from a man who has some of the most experience in this field. So without further ado, I give you A Global Effort with Jon Rouse. First off, I want to say I am extremely excited to have you on my podcast, Jon. I have heard about you and known about you for many years. You've always been the name that I heard first and foremost when it came to any large-scale child exploitation investigations coming from Australia. And I always had an affinity for Australia. Actually, as dumb as this sounds, my father pirated the movie Mad Max, and I saw it when I was 10 years old. I always wanted to visit Australia. I named a dog Sydney. I eventually got to Australia, working with Griffey, where I met Beau Lassard and taught with the AFP. But while I was in this world, I had seen you at many different conferences. I heard you on different podcasts, and you're a legend in this world. If you're in the ICAC world and you've been in it for several years, you probably do know Jon's name. If not, he has been in this world for close to 40 years, and he is continuing in retirement to help the world, to make the world a better place for children, for families of victims, and for survivors. So for that, I am extremely grateful, and the world is grateful to you, Jon. I just want to get your story, Jon. I think this podcast is about stories. It's about passing on information to the next generation so that they can be better. So I just want to hear about who you are. And thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for inviting me, Eric. It's been a long time coming. I'm sorry we couldn't line up moons earlier because it has been a little bit busy, but it's fantastic to have just a chat with you. I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate that. So when did you start in law enforcement, Jon? When was it?
I started Queensland Police in 1984 in general duties and went through all of that kind of stuff that we do, the suit of blue out there, high-speed pursuits, all that stuff. And I retired from law enforcement after 39 and a half years last year.
Wow. What got you into law enforcement initially?
So, good question. Like, my dad was in the Navy. He was in the Royal Australian Navy, and I was born in New Guinea, and we got transferred to Singapore, and I think I had 11 schools in my education career. And yeah, Dad, I just so looked up to my dad. My mum was a nurse with the Royal Australian Navy, and I think that imparted a fair bit on me about service to community, and I miss them horrendously. I've lost them both to cancer, unfortunately. Dad, gosh, 18 years ago now, which is just terrible. You can't ever replace them. But I think that was one of the things that was ingrained into me, is that sense of duty and service and, like, I guess, our military folk in general. And I was a bit torn, like in school. Part of me wanted to be rocking out with bands because I'm a musician. And the other part, don't know why, maybe it was early exposure to Hill Street Blues, one of my favorite police shows ever. Just, I was really interested in being a cop, and I started thinking about that 2 years before I graduated. And so I bit the bullet when I graduated school and said, let's just try out the musical thing for a while. So I started working in a bank because I'm a keyboard player, synthesizers aren't cheap things, and I needed money to buy them. So I joined pretty much a touring act. We supported some of the major acts in Australia while I worked at the bank. But I always had that kind of burning desire to be a cop. And I applied for the police academy while I was working at the bank. We got held up a couple of times while I was at the bank. I've had gun pointed at me. Nothing was a greater violation or infuriated me than the effect that had on the people who work in that bank, the staff that tell us. We lost staff because of that, the stress that it caused. I remember that incident happening. I know that I wasn't scared. I know that I just watched this guy. I listened to him. I mentally noted down everything he was wearing.
Why did you have that mindset? Was it because you had watched the Hill Street Blues and you were already thinking law enforcement?
That could well be it. Like, I was immediately thinking, I know I'm going to have to provide a statement about this and witness, and I'm at these bastards' court. So anything I can do to help police catch these guys, I'm going to give it to them. And, I jumped the counter after they ran out, and I followed the guy down the street, and the actual pickup car cruised past me, and I went, oh shit, that's a wake up moment. Anyway, I went back in the bank, and it was like Hill Street Blues. These guys, these big detectives with their ties half undone and cigarettes hanging out their mouth, because you could smoke in a bank in those days. They turned up with their own typewriters. They spat them down. It was really exactly what I pictured would happen.
Do you think that solidified your decision at that point? I'm doing this. Like, after you'd been robbed a couple of times, you're like, I want to make this right, do good.
I think I'd already made the decision. I was just waiting to be called into a recruit pool, but it certainly, I guess it probably really did reinforce the fact that I want to stop this shit. I'm all about people trying to live in peace and harmony. And I guess crimes against the elderly and crimes against the young are the two vulnerable ends of the spectrum in humanity. And if I hadn't worked in child protection, I would have worked in something about elder abuse. I freaking hate people that hurt vulnerable people.
America, John, we are so bad about putting our elderly, just basically throwing them to the garbage heap of some nursing home. That's it. It's horrifying what we do. After what they did for us, they raised us. They taught us to be better human beings, and we discard them like they're garbage.
It's disgusting.
Horrifying.
It's so disrespectful. But as you say, you don't know what those people have been through or the sacrifices they've made in their life to make this place a safer place for us. And they all deserve our respect and support and help.
And admiration, honestly.
Totally.
I mean,
they've survived on this planet for, 70, 80 years. Well done.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the children.
Oh, they're right.
Now, you applied with the Queensland Police Department. In Australia, Queensland is a state. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. So Australia's broken up into states and territories, and then you've got a bit like the US, actually. We've got our federal agencies and we've got our state agencies.
So you ended up working with the Queensland Police. So what were your first duties as a young patrol officer?
The first duty I had was walking the beat in Brisbane City. I can still remember strapping the gun on the first time and then hitting the street and going, holy, this is so uncomfortable.
How old were you, John? How old were you when you
turned, 20, I was 21.
We can do the math now. Everyone can do the math, unfortunately.
You can. Hey, I was born in 1963. What are you going to do? There's nothing I can do about it.
Here's an interesting side note for you, John. 30 years ago today, I was in the Phoenix Regional Police Academy, 24 years old. I graduate May 6th, 1994. So yeah. Anyway, so you are a young patrol officer. You're walking a beat in Brisbane.
Yeah, that was first thing. Like, you'd walk, I don't know, probably 10, 15K a night. And just dealing with whatever was happening on the street, people coming up to you, breaking up fights, whatever complaint came in, you'd go and attend to it. So I did that for a while. During your initial period, you do 3 tours. So I did the city streets, then I did a suburban station out at a local place called Ashgrove. That some crooks burnt that station down, actually. That's a whole other story. And then I did mobile patrols. And mobile patrols was the one that really resonated with me. And I formed a lifelong friendship because we had permanent partners, and you worked with that same person around the clock. We were on 2 week spin to 3 week spins on night work. So mobile patrols is a 24/7 station. As you're coming in at 6 a.m., the 6 a.m. crew is cruising out. 6 to 2, 2 to 10, 10 to 6. And then there's 7 to 3, 3 to 11s, 11 to 7s, and then 8 to 4, 4 to 12, and 12 to 8. We had just covering shifts. That was where I really became a cop, and I learned about the culture of being a cop. If you heard a call come in and a crew was heading towards something, that you get your spider sense up, we probably should back them up. Crews just started automatically, if they had nothing on, moving in that direction to back the crew up. And you always had your back covered. It was just a brother and sisterhood of law enforcement experience.
Was it always two-person patrols with you guys? Two
Always.
person to a car?
We never had single person patrols.
When I was a young patrol officer, it was going solo was the big thing. You get to go solo. I was fortunate. I was in South Central Phoenix, so we had backup was always, my beat was 1 square mile. Yeah, but whenever we had a chance to have a partner riding with us, it's magical. Like those shifts, just they go by so fast, and it's just like when you connect with a partner, it's incredible.
That's a fact. And like I did connect with a guy there, Lance Herco. He's still like my best friend. I'm on the Sunshine Coast now in retirement. And he's up here as well. He's been my best friend for life. I've saved his life. He saved my life. It's just, so yeah.
There's a bond.
There's a bond. You're right.
And I heard someone recently say that when you have a strong bond with somebody, when you really connect with somebody, and I think when you go through a couple of years with the same person, the connection you make because you were in survival mode, like you said, you saved his life, he saved your life. I think that connection is so profound that it doesn't matter if you don't speak to that person for years and years and years. You call them up out of the blue and you pick it right back up again, like you just talked to him last week. It is. Isn't that incredible? It's insane.
Look, yeah, you're right. And there is actually, you know exactly what he's going to do in a situation, and he knows exactly what you're going to do in a situation. It's like telepathy. And like we'd work 24/7 together, and then we'd actually every year, we'd take 1 week where we'd go fishing on the beach together. And he and I'd hit the beach. He'd go left, I'd go right.
Did you ever talk about work when you were on vacation? Did it ever circle back to work, or were you able to partition it off and just relax and have a good
We
time?
never talked about work.
That's so healthy and so unusual, John, because usually it starts off when it's somebody you work with, it starts off with this and that, and then it ends up going back to work or some kind of incident that you were together.
Yeah, that's the last thing you want to talk about. And you know this, and any of you law enforcement listeners that know this, when you go out to dinner and you're meeting new people, and what do you do? And you're almost like, God, I really don't want to say I'm a cop because it's going to go one or two ways. And then I really don't want to tell you the area of law enforcement that I specialize in, because I know you're going to go, oh, how the fuck do you do that? Like, please don't. So I just don't want to meet people.
I made the joke in America when it got really bad with law enforcement. I would tell people that, hey, what do you do for a living? I play piano in a brothel. It's more respectable than law enforcement in America right now. So I would just tell them that. But absolutely, it's one of those things when I used to be proud of what I did. And then it got to the point where, like you said, oh, they're going to ask. And the worst for me, John, this probably happens to you as well. Somebody who lives across the country will have some bad incident with a police officer 14 years ago. And you mention you're a cop and you got to hear about this. And you're like, are you serious? Are you serious? You're going to bitch to me about it's insane.
And every single one of us has been through that. And that's what beats you down to the point where you go, you know what? I just really don't want to tell you what I do.
Exactly.
Because I know the way this is going to go. You can't understand what we've been through. Only we can understand what we've been through. So
That's a fact.
if you're
That
a
is a
cop,
fact.
absolutely 100%. We will immediately bond and engage, because if you've been frontline, you've been frontline. But people don't understand the trauma that frontline police go through. And you can't explain it.
Yeah. And think about this too. Think about all the stressors you may have in your life as just a normal human being working a normal job, working at Federal Express or Amazon or whatever, all the life stressors, all the things that cause you stress and cause divorce and cause all kinds of things. Now add on top of that, the law enforcement having to engage your survival instinct every single time you respond to a call, you're in survival mode. And that is not healthy for you mentally in the long run. It's not healthy for anybody.
No.
So And people don't understand. We are humans as well. We have all the same issues you have. We have hopes and dreams and desires. We have things that go right. We have things that go wrong. We have regret. We have anger. We have everything, but we take off the uniform and we're a human being just like you. And it's very important that people understand that we are not an empty uniform. We're a human.
That's right.
We grew up and we were humans before we became police officers, and we were humans the whole way through, and we are still human beings.
An absolute fact. And the thing that hollows us out is that exposure to humanity. That to survive in law enforcement, you actually have to start building some fairly solid barriers, or else you will not survive in law enforcement, which is tragic. I mean, bright-eyed, blue-eyed, just want to save the world. And that you realize very quickly that uniform does not protect you from anything.
John, I was just teaching a class in New Jersey. I was teaching a shift mental health awareness class. And there was, on one side of the room, there were a bunch of old detectives that were close to retirement. I always ask people how long you have on. Oh, I'm a year away, and they're all grizzled up. But for some reason, there was a young patrol officer there. She had about a year on. She was invited to the training for some reason. And I singled her out. I said, I'm so sorry to single you out. But I said, hey, can I ask you a question? And I said, do you love your job? Do you just absolutely wake up every day, can't wait to put your uniform on, just want to go out there and just every shift is just amazing? And she's absolutely. And then I looked over to the other guys and I said, that was every single one of you. That was every single one of you. We were all like that. And it took it from us. The job took it from us. So I urged them, I said, work towards not doing that to the next generation. Don't do that to her. Don't take that away from her by focusing on the negative and grizzle. Yeah, the department does suck and we don't get paid enough. And yeah, this boss is an asshole. Mentor that next generation. Give them what you wish you were given. So don't you want to leave happy? I mean, the job takes that from us. And it was tragic.
We've all seen those people in the job that have had like really consistent negative experiences, and it whittles them down. I'm a member of Facebook groups for ex-cops, and all I see is they're whinging, frothing. And you know what? I counted the days down to when I was forced to retire. We have mandatory retirement, and I didn't want to retire. I loved my job. I loved what I was doing, and I loved the people I worked with. Not one day did I not bounce out of bed. I was in the office usually most days 5:30 a.m. I loved what we were doing because we actually were making a measurable difference in people's lives. So a bit of a different journey to what some cops do. The great thing about law enforcement, I think anyway, is that there's so many paths you can go down. It has so many careers within a career. And if you can pick the right one for you, if you can land in the right place and you're fortunate enough to have great police leaders that you're working under, who care about you and fight for your rights. If all those moons align, then you're really lucky. And that was me. I was really lucky. I had some shit bosses, like people who I wouldn't give the time of day, but I had freaking outstanding leaders as well. And
Absolutely.
my rule always is, I hate ever positioning myself as like a leader or a manager, but you are ultimately when you're running a team. But my golden takeaway that I always imparted on any of my senior sergeants or even senior constables as they were coming up into leadership roles was, you're always going to work for somebody who you hated working for, and you will be lucky enough to work for people who you loved working for. Take away from those experiences what you've learned. Learn never to be that person. What did that person do to you that made you feel that way? And never do it. You've learned from them. And from the good leaders, the great ones that inspired you, take that away and marry those things into the leader that you will be as you go forward. And that's what I tried to do. One of the best bosses I had was a guy called Ross Barnett. He's retired now. He's a deputy commissioner. But I remember him telling me one day when I was asking him about something I wanted to do operationally, and he said, John, I trust you to do your job until you prove otherwise. He didn't micromanage me. He let me do my job. He trusted me to do my job. He empowered me to do my job. And you can't ask for anything more, particularly in the field of work that we ended up doing. And so I'm lucky, I guess, circling around back on that I didn't finish the job disgruntled or anything like that. Yeah, look, I've been exposed to everything everyone else has. I've seen shit. I've seen the info. I've seen everything. But it didn't deviate me from the mission. And the mission that we had Doesn't matter whether you're in traffic or drug investigation. Our job is to protect the people that we serve, and we serve the community. We're here to try to make the world a safer place. I've never lost sight of that in 39 and a half years. I've got battle scars like all of us have from interactions with people, and sometimes you don't even want to use the word humanity with what we've been exposed to, but you've just got to find coping mechanisms and strategies to deal with that so you can just keep going.
Getting back to the supervision, interesting that you mentioned that, and it is hugely important. And a theme that I was starting to understand in just doing this podcast is how much of a toll it can take on you mentally when you do not have a command structure that supports you. And I was interviewing Matt Burns from Camera Forensics, and he told me about a man named Paul Conway from the Southampton University in the UK. And he did a study about depression in child crimes investigators. I've actually contacted Paul to interview him. He's going to let me interview him. And the overwhelming reason for depression, it's not the imagery, it's not the videos, it's the lack of support from their supervision, from their own agencies, not being supported by supervision. I wish everybody who became a supervisor thought like you and said, how am I going to take this and learn to either not be that person or to model that person's behavior? So what did you do?
Let's circle back to that in a sec. So the point you just made was very important. In the early years of me working in child protection, a lot of agencies in Australia had mandatory rotation policies for staff that worked in this area. You can't work in this crime type for more than 3 years. And I was always like, where'd you get 3 years from? Where's the academic research that says 3 years is the maximum that you can do this? You could last 4 seconds in this. And then you're going to make somebody work in it for 3 years? So how about we get some science behind what you're trying to do here? I understand your concerns, but ultimately my big fight was, don't your horror about what we do on the investigators that don't feel that, okay? Because you find this horrendous, and yeah, okay, it's horrendous, but because you can't emotionally deal with the work, don't then force your views onto investigators that have got an important job to do. So we actually got academic research in Australia that consulted and interviewed a huge plethora of investigators across the country. And ultimately, you know what most of them came back with as being their biggest problem? They actually didn't want to be put in a box. They wanted some natural light. So agencies would put police dealing with child sexual abuse material into corners and corridors where they can't be seen because of inadvertent exposure and a whole range of other things. Natural light. The other things that resonated with investigators: crap legislation and poor penalties, horrendous sentencing provisions. Those were things that came back as being a problem. Not being able to do something to save the child in that image. The feeling of helplessness that this is going on, but I can't do something because the child's in another country or whatever else. And then, of course, you get into bureaucracy and policy and layers of red tape and all of the management things that come in. But it was never about the content. Never about the content. Because we can treat it for what it is. And now Anders Persson is a guy you should interview too. I'm going to introduce you to him. He is the father of ICSA, okay, the International Child Sexual Exploitation Database in Lyon. He's a retired Swedish police officer. He's a beekeeper now in Sweden. He always positioned this as being that image, that video is a crime scene. It is a moment in time when a horrendous crime is occurring. You now need to deal with it as a crime scene, the same as we would if it was a homicide scene and there's a dead body on the floor. Okay, look at the crime. The only problem we have is we don't know where the crime scene is. The homicide scene, yeah, you've got it. You can wrap the yellow tape around the crime scene and close it off and get your forensics in and everything else. We don't know. We've got to work back from that scene to find that child. And that's where victim identification skills come in. But he never positioned it as being the way our management and politicians and the public probably see it as being, oh, this horrendous kiddie porn, child porn thing. No, that's actually a criminal offense. A poor human being has been enduring this, and we need to find them. And that's the way we treat it. That's how we survive. Move past the horror. The audio is always, for me anyway, is always the most difficult part. But there's accents in the audio. There's clues in the audio. You've got to pull it all apart digitally and try to find the child. And if you manage to do that, that's one of the coping strategies for dealing with the work.
So let me push back a little bit against that. But John, we have a backlog of a year. We don't have time to be doing victim identification efforts. We need to charge these people and move on to the next case because I'm getting pressure from the prosecutor because it's an election cycle, blah, blah, blah. You've heard all of this.
Yes, I have. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if we treat this crime type as a sausage factory for prosecutions in the justice system, you're completely missing the point. So on that, one of the things I did very early when I worked at Task Force Argos, all agencies have to have key performance indicators, KPIs. Usually it's arrests and charges. I turned that around. I made the KPIs how many children we identified and removed from harm, and the metric of arrests, that comes usually with finding the child. And charges, that just started to not be our focus. Our focus was, okay, so we've intercepted X 100,000 million images this year. How many children have we actually identified and removed from harm out of that content, treating it like it is a crime scene? Not, okay, next prosecution, because your police then aren't looking at the content in the offender's collection. They're not looking for the clues. They're not trying to find the children. They're just going, yep, you've got 100,000 images, arrest, next case. This is not a sausage factory.
That's how I was taught. It was offender based. John, it was offender based for me until 2011. Until I started in 01. I took a 2-year break. In 2011, I went to a conference and I met Jim Cole and Rich Brown, and they were talking about Project Vic and victim identification. And it completely blew my mind. Worked in a multi-agency lab. And interestingly enough, the joke I used to tell people, and it wasn't really a joke, is that they put us in a windowless room inside a windowless building. And we had the low ceilings and the stains in the drop ceiling and the tile coming up. It was dingy and dark.
Smell that. I can actually smell that room.
Yeah. And you only people who worked in that room were able to have access with the key card. You had to get special permission to get in there. So what does that tell somebody?
Let's stigmatize it just a little bit more. Let's just stigmatize this work. Yeah.
I used to tell people they throw a tarp over you is what they do because they're just ashamed of the work that you're doing. And we were told by the police department to stop doing press releases, John, because we didn't want people to think Arizona was the pedophile capital of the world. It was crazy. We were a sausage factory. What year was it when you started saying, hey, this is the metric we need to follow? How long ago was that? When was that?
2003. And you know what your agency's approach there to media? Flip it on your head, you fools. Queensland has arguably got probably the highest arrest rate in the country for child sex offenders. Does that make us the pedophile state? No, it doesn't. It actually means that we've got one of the most proactive and reactive law enforcement agencies in this crime type in the country. Lift your game, other jurisdictions, because these people are proportionately spread across your population base. There's no epicenter. So your agency missed an opportunity there to pressure other agencies to get in the fight because you were doing your job and doing it well. That's just got flawed leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as far as the metrics, 100%, there were no metrics of how many children have we safeguarded. That was never a metric. It was how many terabytes have we processed? How many cases have you gotten? How many arrests? How many successful prosecutions? How many years? Not how many children.
Completely missing the point. And that was going back to Anders and Interpol and his role there. That has been the push for having these dedicated victim identification experts within your team. So yeah, you've got your arrest teams that are going out and then kicking the door down, they're bringing the bad guy in, applying forensic procedures to the seizure. And I've been fighting for victim ID databases since 2005. We've got one here in Australia. Utilizing technology to minimize your exposure by running the known and previously seen content through your hash sets, eliminating all of that. And then guess what, detective? These remaining images, I want you to look at them. I want you to put your lens on investigator now and go, okay, the rest of the world, we haven't seen that. How is that in his possession? Who is that child? Was it in the house that I was just in? Hey, you were there. Have a look. Is there a crime scene photo here from the house you were just in where you executed your search warrant? That's the lens we want our cops to be thinking with, not the, I've just pitched another guy for child pornography, next case.
Did that take? I can't even believe you were thinking of that. No wonder Australia has always had the best reputation for confronting this crime and being successful in the investigation and prosecution of it. worldwide, because I always heard you guys were always involved, like Task Force Argos was involved in some incredible global investigations that were taking down huge swaths of offenders and just taking down networks that gave people access to this horrific stuff. But to think that back in '03, I was still an investigator. I hadn't even left my first assignment yet. And it was all offender based. Because when we first started, it was these pictures that were clearly taken 30 years ago. It started with kids standing on the beach, and then it was as time went on, and this took, longer and longer because for a time reference, 2003, YouTube didn't exist back then. In 2003, I got a Gmail account, but I had to be invited from a beta from my brother. So that's where we were technological wise. But to think that even back then, when it was basically the new frontier of the internet, that you were considering the children in the imagery. And then it makes me sad to think it took that long for someone like me who had been in it to even consider that. Jim Cole's presentation about just doing victim identification work is just, it was breathtaking. It's breathtaking for everybody that sees it. So kudos to you for that being a driving force long ago.
It comes down to what you're exposed to, Eric. So like around about that era, we're going way back now, okay? We're into the fax modem era with CRT monitors and Pentium 90 machines.
Pagers, yeah.
Like a Voodoo 2 video card was, wow, man, 12 meg of RAM on your video card. Wow.
I can't afford that.
Floppy disk. Wow. Floppy disks. Yep. That's the era we're talking about. We're talking about the era of pop-ups. So you'd log on and we were smacked with your Internet Explorer web browser with pop-ups. And a lot of it was child abuse material websites, right? Which led to big global operations. One of the big ones out of the US was Operation Falcon. That was the investigators in the US that were involved in that. That went on to create the Dallas Crimes Against Children conference. So we're talking some history here. We in Australia got targets from Operation Falcon. I was involved in the coordination from the Australian response to Operation Falcon. And we had, in the first tranche that came in, over 700 targets nationally. In Queensland, we had 120. We kicked 127 doors in 6 days across the state of Queensland. Queensland is as big as Texas. And we made, I think, around about 78 arrests out of those 127. But here's the kicker that turned my head out of everything. Big national operation, hundreds of targets, hundreds of arrests across the country. Guess what jurisdiction found children that had been sexually abused? Queensland. No other state, no other territory, no other federal agency in Australia found actual contact offending. We did. Why? Because we're fucking looking for it. Okay? Nobody else did. And that was a catalyst. I then spoke at a commissioners conference here in Australia in 2005, where they were citing this operation as a success. And I said, I respectfully tell you, this is the biggest failure in Australia's law enforcement history, because we missed the point as a country. We arrested all these people up. There were suicides, cops were arrested, every walk of life was arrested. It changed the laws, it brought the Commonwealth in, it did all sorts of things. But what people missed the mark on was that there was actually Australian children being abused that were by the people that were arrested for possession, and cops weren't looking for it. So that was a catalyst for me pitching for a national database, which was initially called ANVIL, the Australian National Victim Image Library, to create technology that could help minimize that exposure that I was talking about a moment, creating a hash set database to sweep forensically against new seizures so that investigators didn't have to keep seeing the same content again and again. Focus on what has potentially been produced by the offender that you just arrested. That was 2005. But we identified, God, Eric, why is it such a quantum leap for people to understand that we're hitting your door on a NECMEC cyber tip? Why can you not think that guy might be a contact offender? If he's masturbating to these images, do you really think he couldn't be a threat to your community and you should be looking for that threat? This is not a quantum leap.
I always tell people, and obviously this was long after I started learning about victim identification, and I believe this based on my experience, is that every one of these offenders is on a continuum, and somewhere on that continuum, they touch a child. I said, if you got my computer and you looked at and you forensically analyzed it, and there was all these websites I visited about Toyota Land Cruisers, and I had pictures of Toyota Land Cruisers, libraries of videos and YouTube channels and this and that. Would it surprise you in the slightest to go open my garage door and see an actual Toyota Land Cruiser in there? It's quite honestly that simple. Every human being, in my opinion, every male human being, let's say most human beings, given the right set of circumstances and impunity, would live out their greatest sexual fantasy. So will a pedophile. And masturbating to it, you're unwittingly emboldening yourself to do this. And you're reinforcing that it's okay, and sharing the content online and getting it, and the global reach, just it reinforces this behavior. Of course it's going to end in a child being hurt. Of course.
It's not rocket science, is it? And I've seen recent media from the US where there's arguments about child sex dolls. Hey, we nailed that one a while ago. Okay, we legislated against that quite some time ago. And then because the offending behavior changed, where they started importing parts, so it wasn't a whole doll coming in, they actually got parts coming in. We got the legislation amended to pick up parts of dolls. So you've got to evolve with the methodology and tactics utilized by child sex offenders. But how is it that people go, oh no, they're taking out their sexual interest now on a doll? I'm sorry, they just manifested that into the real world. Now we are one step closer to an actual child being sexually abused because they're now playing with an animate object. But I see it's causing debate in the US at the moment that this isn't a problem. You probably should talk to Mike Burke or one of the really good psychologists and see how they stand on this particular point.
I would absolutely love to. But just thought of, it's just intrigues me, getting back to the whole thought of the actual, that these are actual human beings. We don't know if they're safe. The one thing I wanted to point out is one of the unintended consequences of those databases, John, those like Project Vic and all those other databases that are going to identify previously identified files, is they create an easy button for law enforcement. They create an easy button for them to say, boom, process the case, match it against the database, charge those images, on to the next case. And that seems to be prolific because of the backlog. So how do you balance this ridiculous backlog and the fact that these investigators, they can't get to all the cases that they want to get to? How do you balance that with the time it takes to do victim identification work?
Big question. Okay, so there's pluses and minuses. One of the side benefits of having these databases, and we have it in Australia, you don't have the problem that we have where we have to categorize content, as I understand it in the US. You don't. So for sentencing, a judge doesn't have to hear from you how many category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4, right? We do. All right. We actually have to categorize it so that the judiciary can try to make some kind of sense around the seizure. It's a bit like drugs. What's the purity and the weight, which is
Right.
horrendous in itself that
Yeah.
we're doing that with children. Now, we were categorizing to a 9-tier scale at one stage. Investigators spent months of their lives categorizing for a sentencing report. I fought that with every part of my freaking anatomy for years, and we won. We brought it down to a 4-tier categorization scheme, which is
I
so
remember that.
popular. Category 1 is baseline, which is an Interpol set regime where it appears to be under the age of 13, sexually explicit content. So it's like the worst of category. Then category 2 is it's illegal in your jurisdiction. Now, so as I understand it for you guys, like modeling series, some of the, LS models, a lot of the stuff that we've known about for years, is it illegal? Here it is. It's illegal
Correct.
for us. Putting a kid in lingerie is illegal. That's
As it should be. As it should be.
As it should be. It's exploitation. That's category 2 for us. So it's not illegal somewhere else, but it's illegal here in Australia. Category 3 is it's not illegal, but it's either evidentiary value. It's the 100 pictures of the child that aren't exploited, but might hold the clue that saves the child in the image that is exploited. So it's got evidential or investigative value. And category 4 is everything else, ignorable. Right. So building those hash databases is really useful for the investigators, for court, for us, because it'll immediately produce a sentencing report based on what we know. But we just want our investigators to add another 1,000 images to the hash database. So could you now go through the content that has not been removed by that forensic sweep, apply fundamental victim identification skills, which are available and trained to our law enforcement, sort by file size and seizure and metadata and everything else that we know about, and try to find the child and categorize it at the same time so that you've seen it A VID person now is working on it. It's gone to your victim identification team. Every one of our state and federal agencies has got a victim identification team. And you've then contributed to the national hash set, and you've actually contributed to victim identification as well. You can't go through it. There's welfare benefits from here. They're very clear because you're not having to keep seeing the same content, and there's great investigative value from doing it as well. And then you can move on to your next prioritized case. If the volume is huge, how different agencies prioritize their response to the cases that are coming in is variable as well. You've heard it, we've all said it, we're never going to arrest our way out of this problem, but we can try to make sure that we are keeping a victim-centric approach to the work that we're doing. And those processes keep it victim-centric.
Absolutely. I started to teach people that there's a victim identification specialist inside all of us wanting to get out. Everybody doing this job can be you're the first responder. You're just the patrol officer responding to a homicide that doesn't know how to handle a homicide. So you don't know how to handle it, but you're trained in how to recognize it, how to recognize this is potentially first generation material. And that needs to be the focus. Okay, all these images that match the database we know about, that's great for charging. But now let's focus on this imagery. And what investigator doing this job would not want to rescue a child in that investigation? Would choose not to? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Nobody, absolutely nobody. And it brings them, and I'm sure it has brought you absolutely great joy to do that, to save children. Of course you would choose to do that, right? Absolutely. Everybody has the potential of identifying an unknown victim and safeguarding a child.
100%. And it can be one of the most rewarding feelings in your life, knowing that you have actually contributed to stopping what's happening to that child. And isn't that what we're here to do? Isn't that what the whole purpose of our work is? To stop sexual abuse. Isn't that what it's all about? I think we lose sight of that. We lose sight of that with reporting and metrics and arrests and charges. Yeah, okay, that's all great. But how many kids did you? I go back to those key performance indicators I mentioned. That's why we're here.
There's really no other metric, is there?
No.
There is no other metric.
No metric. All those other metrics go towards like terabytes and they go towards talking about technical issues that your agency is going to have to deal with. Seizures and data and how you triage and manage data. Those are all big issues for organizations and it will continue to be issues. But that counts as crap zero towards actually what the mission is.
Absolutely.
And any child, anywhere. Okay? If the child is outside of Phoenix, does that matter? Really? It shouldn't be. Is the child in Germany? Yeah, save the child. Get it to the BKA. Is the child in Norway? Get the case to Kripos. Kripos will investigate it. There's people waiting to take your lead. Act local, think global. I'll attribute that to John Stammers, who I met at Interpol. He's a current serving Norwegian police officer. I met him in 2005 at Interpol, and that's what he said to me. He said, John, because I had to present on a case that we solved in Interpol the first time I went in 2000. And he said, John, this case, it's everything. It's act local, think global. You did something in Australia and it helped children elsewhere. That's what we do. We are all part of a global team because it's a global crime type and we all have to work together.
Absolutely. I love that. There are no borders to this at all. Not since the onset of the internet, for sure. Hey, I want to go back and how did you get into crimes against children? And then tell me about Task Force Argos and how that became a thing.
Yes. So, like that permanent partner I had for quite a few years, we decided simultaneously together that we wanted to go into the branch, criminal investigation, get our detective's appointment. So we jumped ship from uniform into CIB. I went to a regional crime office and I was dealing with everything, drugs, homicide, fraud, you name it. My bones over 3 years there to get my detective's appointment, which I did. And I then went for promotion to detective sergeant. This is about 1995, which is when my daughter was born. And I successfully gained promotion and I was promoted into an area that's called State Crime Command, which is where all the big units are, homicide, fraud, all the big major crime investigation units are in there. And you go into a pool as a detective in there, and I got a phone call one day and they said, hey, John, congratulations, you're promoted and we're putting you into the child abuse unit. And I went, oh, I've got a baby girl. I can't work there. And there was, I'd never worked in that crime. And the woman who rang me just said, "Hey, you'll be fine. They all got kids in there." I'm like, "No, I remember shallow breathing a little bit." Um, and can I say, if I promoted somebody into Argos as a detective sergeant, hey, congratulations, you're coming to Argos, and they displayed a response like I did, they would not be coming to Argos.
Why?
I'd be going, okay, that's fine. We'll find somewhere else for you. That's okay. But you can't, I would advocate that we'll get onto Argos later, but we
Yeah.
recruited directly into Argos from investigators that wanted to work in child protection,
I love
right?
that.
You actually had to apply to come in.
Love
You don't make people do this work.
it. Told you're going to be doing this. Yeah.
Correct, exactly. That's not what you do. And it shouldn't matter what crime type it is. You don't make people do this, okay?
Now, do you think, John, just real quick, do you think they did that because they just didn't understand how horrible it was, or they just thought it was just another random assignment?
I don't think there was any humanity applied to the process of appointments into positions back then, or skill sets either. Actually, we've got a sergeant vacancy there, put him there. That was it. So I went into child abuse for a couple of years. It was really quite difficult. Like, the broader spectrum of child abuse covers emotional, physical, sexual, psychological. Every spectrum of abuse was covered by that unit, including obviously the homicide, infant homicide, everything, shaken babies, the works we dealt with. I found it really tough, and to any investigator working in that area, my hat has always been off to you, particularly those at work. We've got a unit called the Child Trauma Task Force. I absolutely just worship those people for what they do, because you are working in an area of crime where strategic impact is very difficult to achieve. Okay, the child's dead. You're going to try to get justice for the child. You cannot do anything to bring that child back. You're going to arrest, inevitably, probably a member of the family for the homicide. There's no winners in that work. Equally, we're never going to stop the cycle of physical, emotional, and sexual, and all the kind of other abuse that young kids suffer. It's just man's inhumanity to man is going to continue. I found that a really hard part of my life. Around about the same time, I was consider myself a geek now, but I was a geek then. I was building computers. I was doing my own RAM and video card upgrades and everything else. The internet was becoming a thing. You know, I was an early adopter of Adobe Photoshop. I was using that back then. Built my first web page, I think in 96 or 97 for my band. So I was doing my own HTML encoding. You had all the plug and play tools you got today. You actually had to do it and type the code. So I was really getting into really loving technology. And I had some other variations in my time of child abuse and career around about that time, but I had a detective inspector called Anne McDonald approach me one day, and she just said, "John, I want you to look at the internet, and I want us online. I just want us looking at what this is." So I moved into Task Force Argos. Argos was set up in 1996 as an intelligence probe into network child sex offenders in the state of Queensland. It was actually, what they did is they dismantled I guess for one of other words, the pedophile squad, put them into a task force called Argos. And at the end of that intelligence probe that they did, that unit returned back into the child abuse unit, child and sexual crimes group, which is where I was based, and resumed their duties, which predominantly were looking at historical abuse within the Anglican and the Catholic Church, because you know how the church dealt with pedophile priests is that they'd move them. As soon as it came to light that there's a problem, they just moved them somewhere else and they just continue their abuse. And Argos was a mobile unit that could actually travel around the state to do the investigations. We're very localized. For example, Brisbane looks after Brisbane, and the Gold Coast looks after the Gold Coast, and the Sunshine Coast we have our regions, but State Crime Command took the inter borders within Queensland. And that's what Argos was set up to do. And I was brought into a team there. I had, I think, 3 when I started, equally geeks. We're all online gamers. And
Doom? Do you play Doom?
You want men and women that like sitting in front of a computer.
Yeah.
And you've got that mindset for technology. And that's exactly what online gamers were back then. ICQ was our communication platform. And I'm probably talking gobbledygook to most people, but I can see that resonates with you. So we started looking, I set up this team, just called the Internet team. I had to set up what was called a control operation, which basically allows us unlawful activity. So by going online and knowingly accessing a child abuse website or online grooming, talking to a child sex offender that thinks you're a kid, you are committing a criminal offence. So we had to write up the control operation is approved by a Supreme Court judge, an Assistant Commissioner of Crime, and the chair of the Crime and Misconduct Commission in Queensland. They approve your control operation. You can then go forth and commit a range of criminal activities. Set that up, went online. And the thing about the law at that stage, and this might lead us to another discussion, and we can keep going down rabbit holes all day, was that at this point in time, there was no specific legislation for the image of a child being raped. It sat under an act called the Classification of Computer Games and Images Act, right? An image of a child being raped. We had to go to the state government censor with the content. He would certify that it was a computer game, and he'd give us a certificate that we could take to court and prosecute. Can I tell you, I still vomit over that. But that was the law, Eric. We're going back into the early 2000s. It was evolving. Nowhere in Australia did we have legislation. The good thing is that we had angry people like me. And I was angry about this. And I had the ear of a very good police minister, Judy Spence. And I said, can you come in and look at what we do? She sent half her cabinet in to spend a day with Argos. Mostly her cabinet were mums with kids. They left horrified. She said, what can we do to help you? And I said, let's talk about legislation. So in 2003, we criminalized the possession of an image and a whole range of other things. And it was called child sexual exploitation material. We didn't call it child porn or child pornography or kiddie porn or any other thing. We called it child sexual exploitation material. And the definition is available online. It's very broad. It covers text. It covers cartoons. It covers the conversations that child sex offenders have. It covers the images. It covers the videos. And that legislation has survived the test of time. The only thing that's happened to it is that that further charges have been evolved as the internet has evolved. So being part of a network, there you go. Here's an extra charge for you because you're part of a criminal network. You're providing advice to child sex offenders how to avoid detection. Oh, there's another criminal charge for you. So it's evolved the test of time. And I just make that point because I know it's something you want to talk about, the definition of this content.
Yes, absolutely. But before we get into that, my gosh, you absolute trend-setting, world-changing things that you were doing back then that's incredible. Just all the different things that had to happen but you took the bull by the horns. And Australia has always had one of the best reputations in the child exploitation world. But to simply call it child exploitation material,
how can you not be angry? So if you're angry, it means you're passionate and you care and you want to you force and fight for change. You don't just sit back and go, hey, that's the legislation. No, you change the fucking legislation. The legislation,
well, good for you.
It has to fit the evolutions in offending and the world.
Unfortunately for the line level investigator who's tasked with doing this work, they're just the disgruntled person saying this sucks, and they're not doing anything about it. They're not making any change. They're just complaining and passing those complaints on to the next generation. So it is incredible and it's necessary that people like you exist, and it is to do exemplary things, to do world-changing things, to see a problem and say this isn't right and to fix it. You basically humanized the images. Is the first thing you did is you humanized all the imagery. You said this is not computer games and some stupid whatever nebulous definition you have of this is actual human beings. And then you didn't call it child pornography, that was the first thing it was called when it was always child pornography, child porn and kiddie porn. And I was just like everybody else, John. I just called it child pornography. And it wasn't until I got into that circle with Jim Cole and Rich Brown where it really started to resonate that we are not calling this what we need to be calling this.
No, and like every cop in the US should be saying the same thing. Every time one of your police officers, your senior police, is fronting the media on one of these cases, use the right term. And I constantly hear from colleagues in the US, oh, that's what the legislation, I don't care. That doesn't mean you have to call it that when you're talking to the media. Correct the media. The media is the message to the public. Correct the public. Get a groundswell to fight against. It's a stroke of a pen for your legislators to stand there and go, you know what, let's call it what it is. Pornography. The definition of pornography, Oxford Dictionary, I'll read it out. Printed or visual material containing the explicit description or display of sexual organs or activity intended, and here's the point, intended to stimulate sexual excitement. So if you just want to think about pornography in its most primal form, is images that are designed to stimulate sexual excitement. And we call these images child pornography. So by proxy, we're saying that these images stimulate sexual excitement. Yeah, that's great. For child sex offenders, they can call it child pornography. I don't think that we should be calling it child pornography. I think we should be calling it what it is. Let's go back to it being a crime scene.
When you call it child pornography, you're describing it from the offender's perspective, because that's exactly what you're doing.
Well, it is. It is. That's exactly what I just said. Yeah. Hey, sex offenders can call it pornography all day. I'm
Exactly.
not off out.
But
we can't.
Stop this. It's shameful. It is shameful. It's 2024. It's 2024, everybody. It is time to stop calling it that. It does not arouse any sexuality within you to look at it, does it? Does it make you in the slightest bit aroused? Then it's not pornography, period.
You need to talk to Paul Griffiths too, because he goes back way in time as me. But I'm pretty sure that at Interpol, I went to Interpol in 2005. That was my first meeting. But I'm pretty sure that this discussion, argument, rally, fight has been going on for 23, 24 years about what we call it. And the US is one of the few countries that still, in your legislation, define it as child pornography.
Yes. And quietly, John, I will edit this out of the podcast because I don't think anybody needs to know this. I got a hold of Camille Cooper and I said, hey, can you, and she was the one who worked with me to get the legislation changed. So I was the one that actually pushed and said, hey, can we please do something about this? That was back when I was still a cop. It was 2017 and it's been attached to several different bills. But I quietly take a little pride in the fact that if they ever change the legislation, that I was the one that called Camille and said, we need to really fuck.
You know what? Don't take this out of the podcast, because that needs to be known that you've been advocating and fighting for that. People need to know and they need to join the bloody cause. Like, stop sitting back, okay? And so your opportunity is, if you think you can't do anything else to change it, next time you're doing a press release, that's where your power is. When you're talking to the public, when you're talking to the media, use the correct terminology and denounce the use of this word. So yeah, but the legislation refers to this as child pornography. I refuse to ever use that word. I've never called it that in any public presentation or media event I've had to be involved in my life.
John, we had a supervisor. When I moved to the Child Exploitation Task Force with the FBI, our supervisor used the term kiddie porn, and it infuriated me. But normally, because I was living in the FBI building, I was working under their auspices, so it wasn't appropriate for me to say anything. But anybody else, Phoenix Police Department, I don't care if you're the chief of police, you say something like that in front of me, I would dress you down. I would say things like, we use the term kiddie to describe the table at Thanksgiving, the kiddie pool at the hotel, things that are playful and fun. Kiddie and porn should never be used in the same sentence, in the same discussion, for God's sakes. But honestly, a lot of people don't contemplate, they don't think that, they just don't understand. Like, the general public doesn't think, they don't contemplate it. But it's time that they start contemplating what is actually happening in this. Like I said, it is the rape and brutalization of children.
I would suggest probably, Eric, that like those senior people that use that term and the media, and look, they're lucky. They're lucky. They've never had to look into the eyes of these children and hear their screams on the videos, okay? And maybe they're lucky because they haven't had to do that. And that's probably why they can compartmentalize it, call it that, to deal with it in their heads. We call it what it is because we know what it is, because we've seen it. And
yeah, it's time that we stop. Because I'm sorry, words in today's society, words matter. Back in Sticks and Stones May Break My Bones was a big saying when I was a kid. Just suck it up and move on. But words can be hurtful. Words matter. And especially when we're describing something, imagine If you're, I can't imagine, I can't even begin to imagine, but being a victim of this and to hear it being called pornography to the greater public.
That's the thing. Start putting the survivors lens on for a moment here. The countless men and women globally that are old enough now to understand what happened to them and be aware that it's still circling the globe every freaking day. Put their lens on for a moment. Think about the survivor's perspective. You're calling the moment when their life changed for the worse, child porn or kiddie porn.
Absolute most horrific private thing that could happen to them in their life is now on the internet for anybody in the public to consume, anybody
Correct.
who is after this type of content. I can't
Forever.
begin to imagine the horror of having that. And then to hear it being called something so flippant as pornography is just
Really
shameful.
totally trivializes it. And I said, maybe that's a coping mechanism for our legislators and our bureaucrats and our leaders to hide behind. Maybe it's the way they cope with something that they can't comprehend.
And that's one of the things I hear. That's one of the things we heard was it's just harmless stuff. They want to believe. It gets back to the public not wanting to believe this is happening in their communities, in their homes. They don't want to believe this is happening, so they use terms that are playful or that are dismissive. Kiddie porn is dismissive. That's a very dismissive term. It doesn't make you contemplate what is actually happening within that crime scene image or video.
I think that could be a really rational explanation for the way this is played out. And look, I'm envious of those people. I really am. I wish I lived in their world. I wish I hadn't seen the things that I've seen and the corridors I've had to walk down. I really do. I'd be a different person. But because of what we've done, I'm going to continue to maintain the rage on things like this on behalf of those who
Ignorance,
are voiceless.
absolutely. And ignorance is bliss. They use that term, ignorance is bliss. You have no idea. And yeah, you have no idea the horrors that men and women had to go through in the beginning and still are going through every day. Imagine how exponentially things have increased with the internet. So everything, storage space, ease of access, ease of production is just, it's mind-boggling. Anybody with a cheap phone that they got secondhand on Craigslist can create high definition imagery and abuse children and can absolutely hurt children and then share it with the world. To have it be called something so insignificant as kiddie porn is just
Look,
it.
I lament, I wish I was back in the 90s when the biggest piece of technology you had was a pager on your hip.
Yeah.
Where, phone the office and you can choose to ignore it or not. And like when we started doing the work, the channels that we had to work in were minimal. Had news groups, email, ICQ, IRC, and then we had MSN Messenger and things started spiraling out of control over the next few years. MySpace and everything else came online and Facebook came online in 2004. Everything just went out of control. Then we had the phone, obviously the mobile phone. We lost control once the desktop was in the controlled pocket. It was easy looking back in time for us when we started compared to where we are now.
One of the
Producing
things,
it now,
you know,
it's just
absolutely. One of the things that fascinates me about that time is, and I had a conversation with someone about this, and it was about social media, but the point is a lot of people don't understand that the internet, this ability to message, just like you said, these messaging rooms and these groups and stuff, the ability to do this changed the way we communicate as human beings. You would never walk up to a 13-year-old girl and say, "What is your bra size, young lady? How big are your tits?" But you can sit in your bedroom, in your basement, and you can just type these words, and there's no ramifications. There's no anything. There's no shame. There's nothing. And it brought out the worst. It just gave this channel for people to indulge this horrific part of us, a horrific part of them.
yeah, you're right. But let's go glasses half full
All right.
and go look at the fantastic things it's done. You can stay in touch with people. You can stay in touch with grandma. Look, during COVID, people are locked down, but you can still talk to each other and maintain human connection. But all of the evils that has been adopted by the worst of humanity, and the worst of humanity will always seek to exploit innovations to attack vulnerable people. Phone scams, the freaking Nigerians in the Ivory Coast with what they're doing to people. There's always going to be that pocket of freaking pure evil. But technology equally mediating between all of the nuances around good and bad. I couldn't be talking to you right now in the US. We couldn't have maintained our global law enforcement networks to fight this. It's had its huge spoonful of good with its spoonful of freaking evil.
Absolutely. Technology was advanced. Every technology from the wheel, every single technological advancement has been in the pursuit of human well-being, improving our well-being. You cannot argue this. It is humanity that chooses to take this technological improvement and use it for nefarious purposes.
Correct.
That is, like you said, that is a segment of humanity. But make no mistake, the cell phone is not bad. The cell phone is amazing.
A lifesaver. Literally a lifesaver.
You and I are having a real-time conversation. You are in Australia and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and it is like you are sitting in the next room because of technology. This didn't exist 10 years ago, 100%. It is humanity that takes these things that we design for our well-being and it exploits them. There's always going to be a segment of humanity that will exploit things that were done for good. Technology has always been done to improve humanity.
That's a fact. But throw in there the layer of the developers, the service providers that have capitalized on these innovations in technology, communication platforms specifically, and failed horrendously and continue to fail to put safeguards in for vulnerable people on these platforms. And in fact, go the other way, turn their back on it. Put up barriers like end-to-end encryption to make sure that they don't have to have accountability. Yeah, and we know who we're talking about here.
Yes.
Because I took an interesting view on Zuckerberg standing up in that Senate and being told to apologize to those families that were in there that day. How was it that he had to be told? Where's the humanity in that man to not just stand up and go, look, I'm so sorry for your loss. No, he had to be told to do it. And therein lies the rub. Platform that was built on the exploitation of women, because that's what it was.
Absolutely.
And we expect any kind of humanity out of this person. So there's a responsibility around that. And Julie Inman from Australia, who's our safety commissioner, she's a champion for this safety by design. Before you put it online, did you make sure that it meets these actual basic criteria? I can't go out, Eric, right now, and I can't go out and, hey, I'm going to build a car and I'm going to drive it on the roads in Queensland. I'm not allowed to do that. There's a whole range of laws that stop you from doing that. Yet we can throw new ways for people to communicate out like that. Generative AI, artificial intelligence, we can just throw it out there into the grand pot of humanity and sit back and watch what happens.
And that's what we're doing.
Regulation is required. And I wish the world could get its shit together on that concept, that the internet could actually, if everybody could get together, you could actually put some rules and regulations in here to try to make the world a safer place. I love technology, but it needs to be managed.
I want to go back and ask more about Task Force Argos and some of the work that you did there. Back when you were starting again, this is the Wild West, where obviously, just like you described, legislation hasn't even caught up with what's going on. So they don't even know. And imagine all the people now, John's a young cop, full of fire, and all the legislatures at this point are old people that grew up. They had no access to technology. They had no clue. They had no idea what the internet was or what it could possibly do. So those people are completely out of touch. So then you get into this world where it's this new Wild West and you really see this. You have a vision. You can see with such clarity what is happening. This is the actual abuse of children. So it sounds like you were a very big part of moving this from some type of technological investigation to a human investigation.
Yeah. You realize very quickly that it is all about human beings. I'm sure you do too. I remember the first time I saw a child being raped. I can still see that right now. I can remember the first image I saw, which was a little girl tied to a tree being raped by a dog. And I can remember the first video I saw, which was a guy that we'd arrested, and on his handy cam, he had point of view, first person, filmed himself penetratively raping. Oh, she must have been 4. I'd say she was 4. And she had a lollipop and she was just lying back. And I'm like, oh my God, how many times has this happened to this child? I can still play that video in my head. You'll never, ever remove that. So and you've got a young kid, which actually contextualizes a whole lot of things.
How was that for you, having a young daughter that would during this time when you're exposed? Because I would imagine you didn't realize it was as horrific as it was when you were getting into this, or did you? Because of your prior work with the child trauma unit.
Yeah, I think once I started looking, the biggest psychological challenge I had really was when I went online as a child sex offender, and that was around 2001. Yeah, 2001 on IRC. That was hard because you're convincing a human being, I'll use that word loosely, that you are a like-minded individual and you've got to talk like them and you've got to display the same kind of sexual interest in a child. And that's really pretty hard when you've got a child at home. The hardest work a police officer can do, in my personal view, is the undercover work, infiltration of child sex offender networks.
How did you get into that mindset? How did you get into the mindset? Because obviously in the beginning it's difficult and you're struggling with it, but eventually you became very skilled at it.
So there's 2 things. There's obviously 2 paths, I think, in the covert space. And one is the online grooming space where you go online posing as a child, and the US cops have been doing that forever. That's not mentally, psychologically challenging at all. Ultimately, there's some things you have to do in terms of backstopping and building your persona and the way you're going to talk and all those kinds of things that you need to do to
And you're pretending to be something you're completely the opposite of. It's not like
Correct.
because when you're an offender, you're being yourself plus the offensive part. So that's completely different. I can see
It
that. That
is.
makes sense.
Yeah. So it's social engineering. That's the terminology for it in the undercover circle. You are convincing somebody that you're not really, but you're having the psychology and the mindset of child sex offenders is, naturally suspicious, particularly when they're engaging with other like-minded individuals. So there's a range of things that you have to do to gain that trust. And that's the challenging things. There's very little in terms of formalized training for police around that, other than just throwing you in at the deep end and seeing if you float or sink.
So how did you identify? You said it was invite only. You had to apply to come work with Task Force Argos. How did you identify the people that would be good at this particular task?
That just took a little bit of time. So you didn't come straight into Argos and go online undercover. Like, you actually came in and you went through a range of other roles. We've got a team that's dedicated on peer-to-peer work using ICAT cops and CRC technology. You've got teams that are responding to the work that's coming in from cyber tips and other international investigations. You've got a range of, we spread Argos across, as best we could, across the plethora of work that involves technology. At the very deep end, you've got long-term protracted infiltration. And then you've got a team actually that really predominantly just dealt with grooming, taking over, getting on dating apps, doing all that kind of stuff as kids. You didn't actually go into the really deep end until you'd been through the basic skills of social engineering, which you learn when you're building a persona as a child. Argos was all about exploitation. So back in the 96 onward era, we only had one team that was dealing with the internet. That was my team. The other teams were dealing with those historical, systemic organizations. But ultimately what happened over the period, I think between 2001 and 2009, we grew exponentially in our strength, and the historical institutional work completely disappeared. So we ultimately moved those investigators out and recruited in younger investigators that were more technologically adept and recruited directly into the team. So we started, I think, with 18 staff in Argos. By the time when I left and I was seconded to the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, we were up around, I think, 37 or 38 sworn. And they were broken up into different teams. A sergeant with investigators underneath them, dealing with all of the plethora of different platforms. And then you had your dedicated victim identification team, which we built over time too, that has Paul Griffiths, Adele Desir, and Scott Anderson in it. And I will hands off now say they're the 3 best VID experts in the world. 100%. I'm saying, I don't care who you are, they are the best in the world.
I love Scott. He's fantastic. I love the fact that you had victim identification teams already built as part of your entire unit, because that's something that I don't know where America was. I don't know why America didn't just look at you guys and say, why are we not doing this? We need to emulate the Australians. We need to emulate what Task Force Argos is doing, because it was a human crime for you a lot sooner than it was for us. And I think maybe the US didn't want to believe, because it was these pictures and magazines and VHS tapes and crappy quality crap that was coming in from customs in the mail. And I don't like, we just, but I'm just so impressed with the fact that you saw the humanity in it so early. That's,
Look, I dealt with, I remember I came to the US in 2000. I visited NECMEC and I met Michelle. She was then Michelle Collins and Jen Newman and Lee then. And I met Arnold Bell when he was at the FBI, but I also met Claude Davenport, who was at Department of Homeland Security then. And he was what I think it was C3 then. And he built up a database of where they'd scanned all of the hard copy magazines. And this is an
yeah.
early database. I never picked up from any of those people that I didn't recognize the humanity in it, though. I mean, I think they were all about the cause. I still talk to those people today. Some of them are still in the fight. There's like Jen and Michelle that definitely are at me.
Yeah.
Claude retired a long time ago, and as did Arnold. And I did one of my first major global operations with Arnold. He actually came out to my piping out from headquarters. Literally, the man flies from the United States to stand there as a pair of bagpipes walk me out of headquarters. And I'll never get over that. Like, what a man. That's a brother. Like, he just far out. We did a big global operation together and we've been lifelong friends, and he's one of the really great guys.
Can we turn that around? How highly does this man have to think about you in order to make a trip like that? I've flown to Australia a couple times.
It's
That's a long.
It's not fun. No, look, let me assure you, we Australians know that it's not fun. If there's something happening, we have to go there. And Europe is a good 30 hours away, and the US is like minimum 15 to get across to the States. So we know the pain it feels.
That's incredible, though. That just shows you how much he appreciates you and who you are and what you've done.
Brothers in arms, I love Arnold like a brother. He was Innocent Images Task Force in the early days there at the FBI. He was one of the guys who put it on the map. Just one of those great people that you pass. And that's one of the great, really wonderful things about this work, is I've met so many just freaking wonderful people. You've mentioned Jim a few times. You know, I'm just so proud to, in my afterlife, be working so closely with him in the team that we've set up to try to help police do their work.
Absolutely. John, you know how I feel about this. I'm just some chuck nut detective from Phoenix, Arizona, who was a class clown that really I never rescued any children. It was all offender based. I remember after I learned about victim ID, I was really focused on it, and I found some imagery that I thought was first generation, and I sent it in, but they had either recently been rescued or they already knew the imagery. So I was a part of some of those investigations, but I never did anything remarkable. And to be having a conversation with someone like you and Jim Cole and Josh Finley, I am so humbled and thankful that I get to talk with world-changing people like you, and I get the opportunity, the privilege of sharing you with the world. It is incredible. So I just cannot thank you enough, John.
Well, thank you, but you'll only ever hear from me that there is no I in T, okay? It takes a network. I'm going to use the other one we throw out. It takes a network to defeat a network. Argos wasn't one person. Argos was a team of freaking amazing. There's still people. There's one sergeant that's still at Argos that was there when I started there, man. He is the longest serving undercover officer in the world. He has saved, in his work, more children through proactive undercover investigation than anybody in the world. He's the humblest, nicest guy that you'll ever meet. And I'm honored to have worked with him and all of the other great people that built that team. And so I just had the honor of working with him, Eric. And don't undersell what you've done too. You're still legendary as an instructor for the work that you did in Griffith. I've heard that from countless people about what a brilliant. And so what's that led to in terms of child rescue? And you'll never know the impact you've had in the work you've done. So shut up.
Thank you.
Dumb Chuck or whatever it is you called yourself.
Chuck.
No.
I certainly appreciate that. But man, I'm in awe. You're making my head spin, man. Like it was never a global thing for me. It was just NCMEC complaints in Arizona. Let's focus on the IP addresses in Arizona. Oh, someone's calling from Iowa. They have a guy, and it was a hassle because we got to do this and we got to do that. And we never had our eye on the ball, John. We never had our eye on the ball until late. But to know that there was or people like you that did have their eye on the ball and made it important to spread that information that these are children that need to be rescued.
Every
It
single cop listening to this can do this. Every, s- I'm, I was, because I'm not anymore, but I worked in a little unit in the Queensland Police Service in Australia. We only have a population of a few million in Queensland. All we did was give a shit. Okay. We thought outside our borders because we don't. Look, here's the premise we worked on. We've got an image or a video. We don't know where that child is. They could be in our jurisdiction. And until we know where they are, we're going to find them. And you know what? When we do find that they're in another country, we're going to make sure that country knows and they're going to do something about. Why is this hard to contemplate? If we could get every cop that you know and that we know, and it's some of the work that we tried to do while I was at Interpol, become part of the solution here. It's a global crime. We've saved kids in your country and we've had referrals from the US that have saved kids in our country. Is that not the way it should work? We should be a seamless machine that is working the same way these bastards do, right? They're globally networked as well. They don't have any rules or guidelines or restrictions on what they do. We do, but we can work together effectively. And we've proven that countless times. So many times we have worked effectively across borders to bring them down. So don't think that just because you're in Arkansas or Phoenix or Wyoming or what, that you can't be part of the global solution.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I want to get back to the network of people that you were talking about. It takes a network. Some of the, and I think you would agree, that sergeant that you just mentioned who is still doing the job, the world has no idea who that man is. And he doesn't care that the world doesn't know.
He cares zero.
All he cares about is the mission. That's what and the best investigators in the world that I've ever known in my life, personally, or I've heard about, nobody knows who they are. It's not the guy that writes the book. It's not the guy that has the TV show. No, they're too busy doing the job, right?
That's right. He's head down, bum up from the moment he gets in. The world probably knows Adele's name because the children in the pictures, the documentary.
Yes.
She's in at 5:30. I see it. She puts the headphones on. And she's like that until she leaves to pick up her kid in the afternoon. And that's Adele. She's there for the kids. All of the people that I've worked with are there for that purpose.
And that's a fact. The reason that anybody knows about her is because someone tapped her on the shoulder. And the people that I'm trying to get a hold of I'm tapping them on the shoulder saying, hey, I want the world to know about you. And some of them are very gracious and they want to talk about it. And some of them, they're not interested. The main thing for them has nothing to do with notoriety. They will die and no one will know who they were, but the world will have felt who they were. The world will know.
We will know it. That's the thing. Within the community, we know. Like that particular sergeant, I won't name him because he'd be embarrassed. Like 1 year, we have a conference in Australia called the YTVC Conference, Youth Technology Virtual Communities. I started it at Argos in 2013. 1 year, I just went, you know what? He wouldn't even come to the conference. He just wanted to keep working. I'm like, I want you to come down. I want you to meet people. I want you to see presentations. And my sideline was, I want you to come to the dinner because we have a conference dinner. And what he didn't know was that I set him up for a standing ovation from the audience. We gave him an award. He never would have come to that, but I wanted his peers to acknowledge and thank him for what he has done because I'm in awe of the guy. So many children in America have been rescued because of the work of this one man.
And it's incredible.
It's phenomenal. Within circles, people listening to this, there's going to be people listening to this who know him because they've worked with him on the cases that he sent across. And that's what it's about. Just really amazing, selfless people who are just trying to make the difference in a child's life.
That's the word right there. Selfless. That's the word. But unfortunately, sometimes when you're too selfless, or if you're a very selfless, passionate investigator, you don't consider yourself and you work so hard and you grind yourself down and the fire of your passion starts burning you up. And that's something that's terrible because people that are doing the most important work are torturing themselves in ways that most human beings couldn't even bear.
That's something I think we should explore survival for law enforcement in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's one of the things I said in an earlier one is I just want, I think it was Debbie Garner I talked to. I just want people to leave this job fucking healthy.
That's right. So this is something I think, because we'll have to wrap it up. This is something I think we should cover. So I'd like to, if you want to make a note, I'd like to go down that avenue with you. But the other thing I want to talk about, if you haven't really dug into it, I want to talk about life after law enforcement.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
I think we need to discuss that. And I would like to have the discussion with people about preparing for life after law enforcement.
I went to 15, 20 different meetings to retire from law enforcement. Turn in your equipment here, go sign this document, get this insurance, this, fucking take this to there, go stamp this, go do this. How many meetings did I go to where they said, stand by for the biggest identity crisis of your life? Fucking zero.
Spot on. Now that's something we need to dig into, okay?
Yeah,
because
100%.
the greatest cop killer, but
It is. And so they say law enforcement, their life expectancy after they retire is 5 years. You know why it's 5 years? Because it's fucking skewed to the first couple years when they kill themselves.
right, Paddy, that's it. If we achieve nothing out of this, other than like a great chat and like some people listening to it, maybe getting some nuggets out of it, if we could start the tidal wave of getting law enforcement agencies to start considering preparing for post-law enforcement life, you are leaving the fucking brotherhood. It's like the military guys once they leave the army or the Navy or the Air Force. They've been part of a team with a mission, and they're now, here's your pension, bye. You're excluded from your network. You've lost your identity. Fuck you now. It's, oh, I'm going to walk the dog and mow the lawn and maybe go fishing. That's not fucking life.
Oh, and John, what happens is I tell people this now too. I say, when you retire from law enforcement, it's like a big bucket of water and they just ladle you out of it. That's it.
Number it's gone. Don't have to pay that person anymore. Email account cut off, delete it all, everything. Fuck, you're gone.
John, I couldn't fucking believe this. They had no way to forward all the emails to eric.oldenburg@phoenix.gov to my personal account because they just turned off my email. So anybody who didn't know I was retiring just got my email bounced. How the fuck? Where's the humanity in that?
How about it's with great sadness that we advise you that Eric has retired and he's on forwarding fucking information.
And here's a detective resource if you need that. But if you're trying to get a hold of Eric,
correct,
he has authorized us to give you his personal email account.
A little tiny fucking thing. I hear you, buddy. This is something we can have a nice angry yell about.
Dude, I seriously was thinking about going to the Phoenix Police Department and saying, let me give everybody a fucking 2-hour course, 2 hours. That's all I need.
Yep.
Maybe about what to expect with your identity and your emotions.
100%.
Not your fucking how much your pension's going to be.
So might interest, like Jordan Hadfield's FBI, he took over as one of the chairs at Interpol. And I rang him just to go, hey, how did the meeting go this year? Because I didn't go. It's my first time in 18 years. I haven't been to the meeting. He said, it wasn't the same. Could you come back next year with a few other retired cops? Because I want you on a panel talking about life after law enforcement. I said, fucking A, I will be there. I will fly there myself. I will come because I want people thinking about it because I don't want good people dying because they haven't prepared for this psychologically. Everyone's counting the shirts. I can't wait. Yeah, but you're not thinking about a whole lot of things.
Calculate. Have a timer on their desktop for the day that they retire. It's morbid because it's like they have no idea what they have no.
Our guys have a
clue.
website called "How many blue shirts have I got left?" They can log in. That's not a way to live, man. Need to have this conversation.
Sharing. Absolutely. I love it, but we are not. I mean, between you and I, we are not preparing people for what the fuck is going to happen to them. We're not. And how much of a disservice we are asking you to put yourself in harm's way, no matter what job you do in law enforcement for 20 plus years, 30 plus years, 40 fucking years, and out the door, we're not going to tell you how to prepare for this is going to happen. Guess what? When you found out that your father was passing from cancer, had cancer, and when I found out my father was dying from cancer, we were talked about the emotional things to expect.
Correct. That's exactly right. We were at least thinking about it.
Yes.
Starting to think, oh, okay.
Yeah. What's this gonna be like?
I still wasn't ready for packing up their things, like, and pulling them.
Oh yeah, no,
Oh, I
yeah,
wasn't ready for that shit, and I still cried.
my dad passed a year ago from cancer, so I do not.
Oh, man,
I'm
like, that is the worst thing you can ever do is packing up your parents' things. I've kept some uniform and his medals I've got and all that sort of stuff, but I've got to go. We need to have it in depth on this one,
sorry,
brother.
yeah. I'm sorry. I tend to talk a lot, John. I apologize. I've had a fucking fantastic
No,
conversation with you, man.
I
This is
fucking love talking
awesome.
to you too, but we need to lock in maybe a couple more hours and a couple more hours, and we just tie it all together.
Let's do it.
You take out of it whatever grabs you want to do, and hopefully
I'm ready.
hopefully it's been okay.
I hope I've been okay. I'm loving this. This is incredible listening to you. This is
Well,
I love this.
let's just keep doing it.
Thank you so much, man. Really, seriously. And you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you do enjoy this podcast, please share it with somebody that might enjoy it as well. If you have any suggestions about what you would like to hear in upcoming episodes, please do not hesitate to email me at harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com. I am committed to creating content that you want to hear, that is going to mean something to you. And as always, if you know somebody who needs to hear this podcast, please share it with them. And if you know somebody who needs to hear it anonymously, feel free to email me at harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.